today's World Insight, 50 years since China's seat at the UN was restored, we look at how China has helped contribute to renewable energy, transportation technology, and peacekeepers to other nations of the global south.
Globally, it's really impossible for the moment to have a global organization for that kind of look at all aspects of transport.
And we talked to French ambassador to China, Laurent Bili, about how the two countries are working together on the ecological front. Here is our host, Tian.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian. Prior to the COVID pandemic, transportation accounted for a quarter of the world's carbon emissions. COVID affected not only disrupted international aviation, but also supply chains relying on cargo ships and trucks. It is in this climate that many nations, including China, have announced the carbon zero target dates. Transportation can be part of the solution and not the problem. Many have believed so far. Already, China is helping other developing countries in fields such as renewable technology and high-speed rail. Meanwhile, China has already pledged not to build any new coal power plants in other parts of the world. On that, we speak to Liu Zhenmin, UN Under-Secretary General for Economic and Social Affairs, to find out more. China is to set a specific center for innovation and new knowledge about transportation. How do you see these kinds of information, knowledge, and innovation sharing in the world could help us to speed up the process and really help us to achieve 2030 goals?
Of course, globally, it's really impossible for the moment to have a global organization for that kind of look at all aspects of transport. But I think the center announced by President Xi to be established in the future, I think that we have an entry point that be how the country itself, China, and how the other interest partners could start with innovation and knowledge sharing to start with to really achieve the sustainable transport. Over the discussion we heard from our Chinese colleagues, this is intended for really knowledge sharing, experience sharing, and capacity building, mainly for developing countries. Of course, definitely, I think this would help for the South-South cooperation and in the sustainable transport sector.
You know, also about transportation. How should we use this momentum for the best policies and rally all the stakeholders, not just governments? And how can we do it efficiently, not to miss this window opportunity?
The transport is not only a means for the service of the people, it's also become an industry. For any corporation, only when it becomes an industry, that will be sustainable. You know, if dating back 20 years ago, nobody was interested in investment in solar power generation because it's not beneficial. Economic not beneficial. But now
it's very different.
Very different.
It's a very different picture.
I think this is of course changed technology and has made solar power generation becoming possible, feasible, and practical.
You know, we're talking about smart transportation. We're talking about, you know, more access for people to the roads and the best transportation. But we're having an energy crisis going on at the same time. How do you see that?
Actually, part of the crisis, the current energy crisis, is due to the transport. But essentially, it's an energy strategy and energy program of each of the countries. That's why I think we want to promote the member states and the countries to understand energy, sustainable energy, is not the issue just for one country or another. There need enhancement of cooperation. Like I think OPEC they're controlling the production of the oil, petroleum. They're just focusing on petroleum. But for this world, say like in Europe, the energy supply and closely connected with transport also. So transport, in addition to the road, railway, aviation, and shipping, also including pipe transportation. You know, many of the goods, including gas and oil, they're transported by pipes. So that's if you could really, international cooperation is urgent. But unfortunately, I think for energy, there's no well-organized international structure. And in terms of sustainable transport, there's a lack of international cooperation. That's why I think our sustainable transport, I said time and again, we use this second sustainable transport conference to advance and promote the concept and the vision for sustainable transport, but we are also appealing for member states for enhance their cooperation. Cooperation, not just North-South cooperation, South-South cooperation, also cooperation within the regions. So that's why I think it'll be like Europe. Where the UK confronting oil crisis, the gasoline crisis in cities,
yes,
because of lack of drivers for the lorries. They need. This is a lack of cooperation.
What do you think are the kind of cooperation we need?
The member states need to really build up the global cooperation. They also need to build up the regional cooperation. Regional cooperation also needs to go beyond the sectoral. That be not just oil, not just electricity, also supply. Water supply. All issues are interconnected.
Indeed.
So not just talk about energy crisis, it's also crisis for transport. Like for China, you know, many of the energy also dependent on imports. That we hope there would be better understanding by all member states, by all people. That sustainable transport is not just about driving car and high-speed train.
It's much bigger than that.
Yeah, more comprehensive.
Yeah.
So that's why I think we encourage every country to formulate its national strategy for sustainable transport, national program for sustainable transport. Of course, we also need to continue to promote international cooperation, especially North-South cooperation and South-South cooperation. Otherwise, I think there'll be any possibility for many developing countries to achieve sustainable transport.
Let me ask you, Mr. Under-Secretary General, about the 50 years. China resumed its seat at the United Nations this month, already 50 years. Wow, how time flies.
Yeah, I think the 25th, the celebration.
Indeed.
Yeah.
You know, where China was as a high-level UN official and where China today. How do you see this transformation?
Of course, China is a founding member of the United Nations. But unfortunately, I think that because of the change of the government after 1949, after the founding of the People of China, there's a difference existing among some members, especially I think between the Western powers. There could be People of China was blocked outside the UN for 22 years. That's why I think that this GA resolution is historical. First, ensure that universal membership, universality of the UN. Because I think at that time, dating back 50 years ago, Chinese population accounted for 1/4. You cannot just preclude the 1/4 population outside the United Nations system. Second, I think they improve the political structure of the international relations. 50 years ago, China is poor, but it's a big country.
Right.
Third point, I think economically, I think it helped to defend the global market. You know, globalization actually in the 70s already started. China is a big country with a big population. They are going to developing their own market. Now China become an important partner and supplier, and both supply and consumer market for the world. So that be, globally speaking, I think this historical decision, resumption of the Chinese representation in the UN, is a historical representation, is to help the world to have a well-established universal structure with the United Nations as center.
But Mr. Undersecretary General, how do you see China's role now evolving within the United Nations?
Yeah.
Earlier, it was one of the poorest, biggest developing country. Now its economy has taken shape and also has been contributing more financially to the UN system, and it wants to be a responsible stakeholder of the world, and certainly a regional power. Some even argue one of the two biggest powers in the world. Well, maybe that's not necessarily how the UN sees it, but how do you see China's role evolving? What does the current role, how would you really pin down the current role of China?
I think China's role in the entire international relations, international policy, international economic cooperation, as well as in the United Nations, is increasing year by year and decade by decade. So you can see 50 years ago, China was a poor country. Now it's becoming, it's not very rich, but it's developed very well. Of course, China remains a developing country, but I think China has great potential. At the same time, I think the world, I think many countries have really witnessed the Chinese growth. As I was saying, they are highly appreciate China's contribution to the international cooperation. Definitely, I think China's contribution to UN is increasing in terms of, in addition to the Security Council, the cooperation, but also peacekeeping. China becoming one of the largest, both the chip contributing, otherwise they give the financing support. Of course, I think the most important, China also become an important supporter for the economic cooperation, otherwise I think financial support, otherwise humanitarian support. So we are so delighted to see that over the past decade, that China's contribution still increasing. So I think for many UN members, they will highly appreciate that China is increasing its contribution to the UN for the future, that China will become an important member for supporting international cooperation.
Many are very curious about how, there are not many Chinese nationals, by the way, at this level, under Secretary General level, within the UN system in history.
Yeah.
The current time, only a few. So how do you see your own evolution, in a way, your own transition from being a seasoned diplomat to a UN high-level official? What does that mean, this transition for you? And what do you see, how this could be an important understanding for the others as well?
No, actually, this is accumulation of your experience. Of course, also the reinforcement of your knowledge. You don't remember that in my career, I devoted almost all my service to the multilateral.
That's true.
Multilateral, yeah.
That's true.
Before my joining UN, I served four times abroad. Twice in New York, twice in Geneva. So this helped me to understand the United Nations, know the United Nations. And the second is in my career, even when I was very young, I started to participate in many of the multilateral negotiations. Third, I think
that shaped who you are, huh? in a way.
Yeah. I think, but in addition to this experience, do not refuse to learn any new knowledge. For the time being, you'll say, okay, this is not good for my career. But one day, you will say, okay, useful.
It's a great advice. Really appreciate that, Mr. Undersecretary General, for your takes and also your insights. My in-depth interview with Mr. Liu Zhenmin, UN Undersecretary General for Economic and Social Affairs. After the break, I talked to the French ambassador to China, Laurent Bili, about how the two countries are working together on ecological front. Next.
On that respect, China is doing quite well. So it's a small difference that is still existing.
Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian. Last week, representatives from all over the world met virtually and also in person to discuss a post-2020 biodiversity framework. And some got to attend in person, including French ambassador to China, Laurent Bili. He said China's hosting of the biodiversity conference reminds him of when France hosted the historic Paris Climate Summit. What's his takeaway from the event, and what has he learned about China's biodiversity efforts and cooperation with France? Let's take a listen. Your president spoke at the leaders' meeting. He talks about the land and sea, 30%, of course, the French has always been looking after. So how do you see the challenges of achieving that from your perspective?
If I take, by example, the speech of President Xi, it's really the idea that biodiversity, protection of biodiversity, is at the heart of development policies, of economic policies, and that it can't work separately. And in fact, in many leaders, in a way, in another, we find that same idea. And already, on that respect, China is doing quite well. So the small difference that is still existing is probably something that can be achievable.
So you believe there's already a transitional mindset?
We can see that the convergence, the mobilization of the international community is quite high. Yes, there is definitively a lot in common in our mindset.
And also China tries to establish many national parks. You've been living in China for some time. You even went to see some of these places to compare notes. Mr. Ambassador, how do you see this as the way for China, in order to protect its own habitat?
Well, it's of course very important, and I'm also proud that we are cooperating together for that. Next month I will go to Zhejiang province, where we have a cooperation between Agence Française de Développement and local authorities. It's not only about financing projects, it's also about exchange of expertise. It's about twinning between national parks in France, in Europe, and in China. And I think this exchange of
expertise... It's about synergy, isn't it?
It's about synergy, it's about good experience. So it's very important. Already the number of species which are protected within this national park is very key. And at each time that I go to some provinces and I discuss with local authorities, I can really realize that it's not only a speech from the top, but also that people in the provinces, they are aware of the need, and they are really committed. During this weekend, I spent some time in Yunnan, and especially in Dali district, and I could really feel that with my interlocutors, the party secretary, the governor. They are really mobilized.
Did you enjoy it, the trip?
I enjoyed it so much.
Having said that, though, maybe a lot of work to come, because we heard both your president, French President Mr. Macron, and also Chinese President talking about financial support. China has promised to establish a 1.5 billion fund for developing countries. Well, your president, Mr. Macron, has been talking about multilateral financial institutions need to look at biodiversity as one of the key when they're making decisions. So, Mr. Ambassador, how do you see these commitments coming from presidents on the financial issue?
Well, our president also mentions the fact that 30% of our financial flows on developments will be earmarked for biodiversity-related projects. So I think, once again, on these two speeches, you see that the direction is about the same, with the creation of a new fund but also from national commitments to direct national help or national development funds for biodiversity-related projects.
Another thing is about how should we see the different development stage. We know there were some controversial issues earlier, both at the climate change summits, and of course, you will see that in the biodiversity discussion. How does France look at that issue now? Because we've been really going through some ups and downs.
Well, France has always been advocating the idea that there were also differentiated responsibility, and is one of the countries which is contributing more for public aid for development. Our president mentioned also the initiative on the green wall forest in the Sahel region, where we mobilize 18 billion euros. Already, I think 9 billion, he mentioned, have been already invested for that project, to speed up that project.
It's so very interesting that he used the green Great Wall.
Yes, yes, I think the idea is quite clear. And France is very coherent in his approach. We are, of course, ambitious in terms of speeches, but we are also ambitious in the way we mobilize our own resources, in the way we advocate. We are advocating the issue within the EU, within the UN system, the Bretton Woods organization. And I think in the last, I'll say since the Paris Agreement, a lot of ground has been already covered.
What your president said regarding, whether imports, the products are going to be related to biodiversity concerns, and also what does it mean for investment? What is going to be the decision-making process regarding biodiversity? That is a very positive sign about how leaders are thinking. But at the same time, Mr. Ambassador, some also worry that whether some in other parts of the world might use this as a barrier for trade.
Well, I think some may try to excuse the traffic barrier to avoid their responsibility as well. So we have to have a sound debate. Also, because we need some transparency, we need some readability about what's going on. Some countries may say that it's legal logged wood, by example, but at the same time, do they have really all the procedures internally to assure the international community that it's really renewable wood that they are exporting? So we need probably some time for discussing this kind of things. But at the same time, I think it's really give a direction, because if we don't protect the main pollutant of the planet, we are not going to go anywhere. At the same time, we need to help the country, and we need to work together with the country.
How shall we make sure that the process of discussion will not spoil the spirit of discussion? That's always a very tricky thing, As a seasoned diplomat, you know that very well. Tell me more about your take on that.
Well, I think for the Paris Agreement, we benefit of the help of many countries around the world to have also regional coordination and to use their influence. This time, I think China is on the driver's seat role, but I just can say that I can ensure that France will be very constructive and helpful to achieve an ambitious result.
We also noticed that some of the largest economies in the world are still not a member of CBD. Many wonder when that would come, and many wonder whether that is fair for the rest of the world who are already signing on it. Mr. Ambassador, what's your take?
I think leading by example always achieves results. So
I love that, yeah. And the other thing is about how to maintain this momentum from now until April. It is likely to be another in-person meeting if the pandemic situation recedes. So how do you see France's role will be in that regard? For example, working with the host of the conference with China, for example, working with the UN as well, please.
Well, I think our leaders are having very regular conversations.
Yes.
And I think that's really helpful to exchange notes. We will have also a new Paris Forum where this kind of ideas will be discussed. So I think we can benefit of all these other meetings, G20 meetings, all these meetings that are already planned to keep the momentum and to help us to work together.
When we look at the global issues, some of the important spirits you already mentioned, but every country has their own circumstances. We know some countries are very much struggling about their own politics and things like that. So how shall we see this pace of discussion? It's possible to bring China and France together onto the same platform, but bring everybody else.
I think we have to convince people that first, the question of biodiversity and health is one, and that we are not just working because
biodiversity and health. Yes,
we're just not working because we love wildlife, which is fine, but we work also because we want to protect our citizens. We have also to convince people that investing in protecting biodiversity is a sound investment, economic investment, and even for a better life of the population, it's an important investment, and even for the future of the planet. But maybe the future of the planet is always a bit too far away, even if we think that the clock is ticking. But just even short-term investment can make the life of people better. And I think in that sense, China and France can be very helpful to convince countries which are yet not completely convinced.
We have seen over the past 2 to 3 years dramatically worsening international environment in terms of multilateralism and working together. But conferences like this, once we're here in person, it seems that it gives us some kind of momentum that things are working, it seems, to the better. I don't know, what is your gut feeling?
I completely agree. Speaking about Jacques Chirac, some time before 2002, I don't remember exactly when, but he says, the house is burning and we are looking somewhere else. It was in South Africa. And so in meeting we can see that we are not somewhere else. And so it gives us some optimism on the fact that even leaders coming from very different background, different system, are convinced that we have to work together. I think it's, yes, it gives us optimism for the future of the planet.
My earlier interview at the COP15 with French Ambassador to China, Laurent Bili. And that's all we have for today. If you'd like to see more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for watching.